It happened so suddenly that I still struggle to put it into words, and I need you to imagine this with me because the way it unfolded isn't something you could just brush off. Picture this: you go to sleep next to the person you know better than anyone else in the world, the voice you've memorized from thousands of late-night talks, whispered confessions, morning greetings, little arguments, and apologies. Then you wake up, and that same person, your wife, your partner, your anchor, opens her mouth, and the sound that comes out doesn't belong to her anymore. It's not just that her tone was off or that she had a sore throat, no. I mean, her voice had changed completely. It was like a stranger had moved into her body overnight. And then, just when I thought it was some kind of bizarre fluke, she leaned in close, looked me straight in the eyes, and said words that chilled me to my core. Asterisk, we've done this before. Asterisk. Now, before I take you deeper into this, let me stop here and talk directly to you because I know why you clicked on this video. You came here searching for answers, maybe curiosity got the better of you, maybe the title itself made you think, what if something like this happened to me? And let me promise you this right now. By the time you finish this story, you'll not only understand what happened that night, but you'll question everything you thought you knew about memory, reality, and the people you trust most. This isn't just a mystery. This is something that messes with the very foundation of love, marriage, and human connection. If you stay with me until the end, and I urge you not to click away, you'll see the truth behind those words my wife spoke, and why her voice changing wasn't the scariest part at all. Think about it for a second. How well do you really know the voice of the person closest to you? Could you tell if it suddenly didn't belong to them anymore? Could you explain if the same lips, the same face, the same eyes suddenly carried a voice that didn't match the person you thought you knew? That's the psychological hook here, because our brains are wired to recognize voices just as deeply as faces. Scientists say it's one of the first imprints we carry from childhood. The sound of familiarity, comfort, home. So when that sound is ripped away, when it's replaced by something that doesn't belong, it shakes your sense of safety like an earthquake. And that's exactly what happened to me. But let me take you into my world the way it unfolded, because if I just jumped straight to the end, you'd miss the little pieces, the details, the subtle cracks in reality that led me here. My wife and I, we had what you might call an ordinary life. We weren't the picture-perfect couple you see on Instagram, but we loved each other in real, messy, complicated ways. We had our inside jokes, our Sunday routines, our little arguments about dishes or money or whose turn it was to walk the dog. The kind of stuff every marriage goes through. That's why when this happened, when her voice became someone else's, it wasn't just strange. It was devastating. Because how do you argue with the idea that the person you love most in the world isn't who you thought they were? Now, you might be thinking maybe she was sick, maybe it was some kind of medical thing like laryngitis, maybe her voice was hoarse from allergies or late-night talking. And trust me, those were the first things that ran through my head too. But no, this wasn't raspy, this wasn't strained. This was like waking up next to a stranger who had somehow slipped into her body. Her voice was deeper, smoother, and carried an accent I had never heard from her in all the years we'd been together. It was as if someone else entirely was speaking through her. And the more she spoke, the more unsettled I felt, because every word carried a familiarity I couldn't explain, like déjà vu pressed into sound. And then came the line, the words that turned a creepy moment into something life-altering. She looked at me dead serious, with eyes that seemed to carry weight I had never noticed before, and she said, asterisk, we've done this before. Asterisk. Now, think about that for a moment. What would you do if your partner told you that? Would you laugh it off, thinking maybe they were half asleep and mumbling nonsense? Would you push them to explain? Or would a part of you, deep down, feel a chill crawl up your spine because maybe, just maybe, they weren't joking? That's when my mind started spinning, and I want you to follow me here because this is where the psychological part gets real. Our lives are built on repetition. Patterns. Routines. But what if those patterns weren't just habits? What if they were cycles? What if you've lived them before and you just don't remember? What if someone close to you remembered, though? And what if the proof came in the form of something you couldn't deny, like the sound of a voice that wasn't supposed to exist? That's the hook that pulled me in, and now I wanted to pull you in too, because the deeper I went into this, the more I realized her words weren't random. I'm talking directly to you now because I know some of you watching have experienced déjà vu so strong it scared you. Maybe you've walked into a room and felt like you'd been there before. Maybe you've heard someone say something word for word that you swore you had already heard in another time, another place. Now imagine that déjà vu multiplied by 10, staring back at you through the eyes of your wife, who now carries the voice of someone else, telling you that yes, this has happened before, and you were a part of it. That's not just creepy, that's reality bending. And I'm telling you right now, you're going to want to stay with me because the truth behind what she said didn't just change my marriage, it changed everything I thought I knew about myself. At first, I wanted to push it away to explain it logically. That's what most of us would do, right? We try to ground ourselves. I asked her if she was feeling okay, if she was pulling some kind of prank, if she was imitating a voice to mess with me. But she just kept talking, calm, steady, unbothered, like nothing was wrong. And the more she spoke, the more I noticed something else. She was saying things she shouldn't have known. Details about my past, moments I had never shared with her, secrets I had kept locked away. It was as if her new voice carried knowledge that belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who knew me too well. Now here's where I need you to lean in and listen closely, because this is where the story turns from unsettling to terrifying. When she said, "We've done this before," she didn't mean last night, she didn't mean last week, she didn't mean in our marriage. She meant something much deeper, something much older, something I couldn't even begin to wrap my head around. And as her voice carried those words, I felt like I wasn't just listening to my wife anymore. I was listening to history itself. And that's where I'm going to leave you hanging for now, because what came next, the explanation she gave, the truth she revealed, was something I could have never prepared for. You'll want to stick around, because if you think a changed voice is the mystery here, you're only scratching the surface. The real story is what she knew, and why she remembered when I didn't. When she spoke those words, "We've done this before," I couldn't stop replaying them in my head. They echoed louder than her changed voice itself, reverberating in my thoughts long after she said them, like a song lyric you can't shake but with the heaviness of something much darker. I tried to calm myself down by reminding myself of the kind of week I'd had. Work had been brutal, the kind of endless string of late nights staring at a glowing screen until your eyes burn. I had been running on fumes, distracted, living half in reality and half in autopilot. Maybe, I told myself, I was just overreacting to a strange morning voice or the tricks exhaustion can play on you. But the more I thought back to recent days, the more unsettled I became, because I realized my wife had been acting different even before this morning. Subtle differences, the kind you dismiss at first until they pile up so high you can't ignore them anymore. We had gone out with friends just the weekend before. We were at a casual dinner, nothing fancy, just one of those chain restaurants you go to when you want comfort food and an easy night. Everything was normal at first, laughter, drinks, shared appetizers, little jokes that only longtime friends get. But at one point she told a story from our past that I swear never happened. It wasn't just slightly off, it was completely fabricated, at least from my memory. She spoke about a trip to New Orleans, about walking Bourbon Street during Mardi Gras, about me losing my phone in the crowd and her finding it hours later tucked into the back pocket of my jeans. Everyone laughed, and I laughed too, but not because I remembered it, because I was too embarrassed to admit in front of everyone that I had no clue what she was talking about. Later, I pulled her aside and asked when that trip supposedly happened, and she looked at me strangely, almost pitying, and said, "You don't remember? We've been there twice." I laughed it off then, chalking it up to my bad memory, but the way she looked at me, the way her eyes held this deep certainty, stuck with me. That wasn't the only time. Just 2 nights before her voice changed, we were lying in bed, scrolling on our phones, the TV droning on in the background, when she randomly said, "You used to love this show." I looked at her, confused, because the show on the screen was something I had never even watched before. It was one of those late-night reruns of an old sitcom, laugh track blaring, the kind of thing you either grew up with or you didn't. But she spoke with absolute confidence, like it was part of my identity, like she knew me better than I knew myself. When I told her I'd never seen it, she gave me that same look again, the one that said she knew something I didn't, and she quietly added, "Maybe you just don't remember yet." At the time, I brushed it off as quirks, as maybe she was confusing my experiences with someone else's, or maybe I had just forgotten things. After all, memory is a tricky thing. Psychologists talk all the time about how false memories get planted, how déjà vu is a misfiring of the brain. But after waking up to her voice being completely different, all those little moments suddenly felt like puzzle pieces sliding into place. I started questioning whether this was really just my wife being forgetful or playful, or whether there was something much bigger, much stranger happening beneath the surface. I also need you to understand that my wife isn't the kind of person to pull pranks. She isn't the type to imitate accents or voices or make up elaborate stories for fun. She's grounded, practical, the kind of person who balances me out when I overthink. Which is why her transformation hit me so hard. Because if it had been anyone else, I could have blamed it on a joke gone too far. But with her, this wasn't a joke. This was real. Still, a part of me needed a rational explanation, so I started scanning through the last few weeks for anything unusual that could explain her behavior. And that's when I remembered something odd. About a month ago, she had reconnected with an old college friend online. At first it seemed innocent enough. She'd laugh at old messages, tell me stories I'd never heard before, stories about parties, late-night drives, near misses with campus security. But then she started spending more and more time chatting with this friend. She never told me exactly what they talked about, just vague answers like asterisk, we're catching up. Asterisk, I didn't think much of it then, but looking back, I can't help but wonder if that reconnection had something to do with all of this. And then there was the business trip. 2 weeks before all of this happened, she left town for 3 days, claiming it was for a work conference. She came back with souvenirs, brochures, even pictures on her phone of hotel lobbies and restaurant meals. But here's the thing, when I casually mentioned one of the brochures to a coworker who actually attended that same conference, he looked confused and said she wasn't on the attendee list. I brushed it off as a misunderstanding at the time, but now, with her voice changed and her words ringing in my ears, I can't stop replaying that conversation. Was she really where she said she was? And it wasn't just her behavior. In the days leading up to that morning, I had my own experiences that felt off. I'd find myself standing in a room forgetting why I had walked in. Not the normal forgetfulness we all joke about, but heavy, disorienting blanks, as if pieces of my day had been lifted out and erased. I'd wake up in the middle of the night certain I'd just been dreaming something vivid, but the images would vanish before I could grasp them. Sometimes, when I looked at her sleeping next to me, I felt this strange tug in my chest, like I was remembering her from another place, another time, but I couldn't pinpoint where. Now, I don't want to lead you too fast because the worst thing in a story like this is rushing to conclusions. That's where the red herrings come in, and trust me, there are plenty. Maybe it was stress, maybe she was sick, maybe I was the one losing my grip. Maybe that old college friend planted ideas in her head that she started believing. Or maybe the business trip wasn't what it seemed, and someone else followed her back. Every possibility ran through my mind, and each one felt just plausible enough to make me second-guess everything I thought I knew. The scariest part is that none of these explanations really felt satisfying because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't just stress or sickness or bad memory. This was something larger, something deliberate, and the way she kept looking at me, calm, unshaken, as though she had been waiting for me to catch up, told me she knew exactly what was happening even if I didn't. That's the hardest thing about uncertainty. It isn't the not knowing, it's the way the not knowing makes you see danger everywhere. And as much as I wanted to believe I could explain her changed voice, her strange words, her fabricated memories, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that I wasn't just dealing with my wife anymore. I was dealing with something, or someone, inside her. And that thought terrified me more than anything else. Because if her voice had changed, if her memories weren't hers, and if she was telling me that we'd done this before, then the real question wasn't what was happening to her. The real question was, what was happening to me? And that's where things only start to unravel, because what came next wasn't just a strange voice or a cryptic phrase. What came next was proof that shook me to my core and forced me to confront a truth I wasn't ready to face. I knew I couldn't just let this go, not after everything that had happened. My wife's voice had changed, she was speaking as if she knew things I couldn't remember, and her words, asterisk, we've done this before, asterisk, kept circling in my head like vultures waiting for me to break down. So I decided to look for answers, quietly, carefully, without letting her know how rattled I really was. The problem was, the deeper I tried to dig, the more the world itself seemed to resist me, as if something didn't want me finding out the truth. And that's when the obstacles began, the kind that make you wonder if you're really in control of your own life or if someone else has been pulling the strings the whole time. I started small. I thought if I could just piece together the recent weeks, maybe I'd spot a pattern. I went looking for the brochure from her supposed work trip, the one I'd found on the kitchen counter the day she came home. I remembered holding it, the glossy cover with a city skyline printed across it. But when I checked the drawer where I'd tucked it away, it wasn't there. I tore apart the whole kitchen, checked behind the fridge, the junk drawer, even the recycling bin. Nothing. It was gone, as if it had never existed. At first, I told myself I must have misplaced it, but the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I never misplaced things like that, not when they'd been gnawing at me for weeks. Then there was her phone. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I picked it up, telling myself I wasn't snooping, I was just trying to find answers. But when I scrolled through her messages, everything was too clean. No chats with the old college friend I knew she'd been reconnecting with, no threads from the supposed work conference, nothing out of the ordinary at all. It was like her phone had been scrubbed, like someone had gone in and carefully deleted the pieces I was most interested in. My chest tightened as I put the phone back on the nightstand, because suddenly I wasn't sure if she had deleted them herself or if someone else was involved. Either way, the silence of her missing conversations was louder than anything she could have said. And then something happened that made me realize I wasn't the only one aware of what I was doing. A few days into my quiet digging, I got an email from a sender I didn't recognize. No subject line, no introduction, just a single sentence typed out in bold letters. Asterisk, stop looking or you'll regret it. Asterisk, I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, my hands frozen on the mouse. My first instinct was to laugh it off as spam, some random phishing attempt, but the timing was too perfect. I had only just started questioning her story, and suddenly I was being warned to stop. My heart sank as I deleted the message, but the words burned into me, feeding the paranoia already eating away at my mind. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone didn't want me to dig deeper. But the harder they tried to scare me off, the more determined I became. That's when I started reaching out to people from her past. I tracked down one of her old college roommates through social media and sent a friendly message, just asking if she remembered the Mardi Gras trip my wife had spoken about. She replied quickly, telling me she had no memory of such a trip, and in fact, she didn't think my wife had ever even been to New Orleans during those years. But then, a few hours later, the same woman sent me another message. This time it was short and cold. Asterisk, forget what I said. Don't contact me again. Asterisk, I reread that line over and over, my stomach twisting. Why would she backtrack like that? What, or who, had made her change her answer? The strangest thing, though, wasn't even the missing evidence or the anonymous warning. It was what I found in the attic. I hadn't been up there in years, but one night, restless and unable to sleep, I climbed the old wooden ladder and started digging through boxes of forgotten things. That's when I stumbled on a photo album I didn't recognize. The cover was plain black, worn at the edges, but when I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. There were pictures of me and my wife, only they weren't the pictures I remembered. Some of them looked familiar, our wedding, a trip we'd taken, a Christmas party. But others were completely foreign, images of us in places I swear we'd never been, standing with people I didn't know, smiling as if everything was normal. One photo in particular made my hands tremble. It was of me and my wife standing in front of a house I had never seen before. The eerie part wasn't just that I didn't recognize the house, it was that I recognized the clothes we were wearing. They were outfits from years ago, things I had long since thrown away or donated. Yet here they were, captured in a moment I had no memory of, with her smiling at me like it was the most natural thing in the world. I slammed the album shut and shoved it back into the box, my chest heaving as I scrambled back down the ladder. But I couldn't unsee what I had seen. The next morning, I tried to bring it up casually, asking if she remembered us ever owning a house before the one we lived in now. She didn't even flinch. She just smiled and said, asterisk, you'll remember eventually. Asterisk, that was when I realized she wasn't confused at all. She wasn't stumbling over false memories or making mistakes. She knew exactly what she was doing. And as much as I wanted to confront her right there, as much as I wanted to shake her and demand answers, something in me hesitated. Because I was starting to see the truth, that whatever this was, it went far deeper than just my wife. There were missing pieces, hidden betrayals, maybe even people around me who weren't who they seemed. And I had no way of knowing who I could trust anymore. That's why I wasn't surprised when a so-called ally finally stepped forward. A coworker of mine, someone I'd known for years, pulled me aside after work one night. He leaned in close, speaking in a hushed tone, and said, asterisk, I know what you're going through. I've seen it before. Asterisk, his words froze me in place because how could he possibly know? When I pressed him for details, he looked over his shoulder nervously and muttered, asterisk, just be careful. They'll come after you next. Asterisk, before I could ask who they were, he walked away, leaving me more shaken than before. And just when I thought I was starting to connect the dots, just when I felt like I might finally be getting closer to the truth, something happened that knocked the wind out of me. I came home one evening to find the attic ladder pulled down. My wife was standing at the bottom, holding the black photo album in her hands. She looked at me with that same calm smile, but her voice, still not hers, was steady as she asked, asterisk, were you looking for this? Asterisk. And that's when I realized the photo album wasn't just some forgotten piece of the past. It was bait. And by opening it, by digging where I wasn't supposed to, I had stepped straight into whatever game she was playing. When I saw her standing there with that black photo album in her hands, the same one I had just discovered in the attic, I felt the air leave my lungs as if someone had punched me. She didn't look angry, she didn't look surprised, she looked like she had been waiting for me to find it, like the whole thing had been orchestrated from the start. And in that moment, staring at her calm smile and hearing that voice that still wasn't hers, I realized I wasn't just playing catch-up anymore. I was a pawn in something I couldn't yet understand, and the worst part was she seemed to know exactly how far behind I really was. I wanted to ask her why, to demand she tell me what was really happening, but before I could get a word out she simply closed the album, tucked it under her arm, and walked past me like the conversation was over. I stood frozen, too stunned to follow because I knew in my gut that if I pushed too hard right then, she'd shut me out completely, and I wasn't ready to lose access to whatever truth she was holding on to. But as unsettling as that moment was, things got even more complicated the very next day, and not because of her. That morning, while I was at work trying to distract myself with meaningless tasks, my phone buzzed with a text from my younger sister. She never messages me during the day unless it's something serious, so my heart skipped as I opened it. Her words made my blood run cold. Asterisk, did you send me this? Stop playing games. Asterisk attached was a blurry screenshot of an email she'd received, almost identical to the one I'd gotten before, the one that said asterisk, stop looking or you'll regret it. Asterisk, except this time, the message had been even more personal. It had included her name, her address, and a sentence that made my stomach flip. Asterisk, tell your brother to stop or we'll come for you too. Asterisk. I could barely think straight as I called her, demanding to know when she got the email and if she had told anyone else. Her voice was shaky as she told me she had gotten it just that morning, and no, she hadn't said a word to anyone. She thought maybe I was behind it, that it was some kind of twisted joke, because how else would her name and address be connected to this? The worst part was I couldn't even convince her otherwise without sounding insane. How could I explain that I was trapped in some kind of looping nightmare where my wife wasn't herself, where photographs existed of lives I didn't remember, and where strangers were warning me to stop digging into something I couldn't even define? I told her as calmly as I could to delete the email, to stay off social media for a while, and to let me handle it. But after we hung up, I sat at my desk with my head in my hands, because this wasn't just about me anymore. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this had just widened their net, and now the people I loved most were at risk. That's when the paranoia really started eating away at me. I began questioning everything and everyone. If my sister had been dragged into this without knowing a thing, who else might already be involved? Could my coworkers really be trusted, especially the one who had whispered to me that he knew what I was going through? Was he genuinely trying to help me, or was he part of the same game, feeding me just enough information to keep me off balance? The idea that I might have walked into a trap didn't feel far-fetched anymore. It felt inevitable. Every glance, every phone call, every message started to feel suspicious, and the line between ally and enemy blurred until I could barely tell the difference. The contradictions started piling up too, the kind that make you feel like your brain is splitting in half. One night, desperate for some clarity, I went back up to the attic. I knew it was risky, but I needed to see that album again to prove to myself it had been real. Only when I got there, the box where I'd found it was gone. Not just moved, gone. As though the entire thing had vanished into thin air. I searched every dusty corner, pulled open every old container, but the album had been erased from existence. Yet here's the part that drove me crazy. The ladder had been left down as if someone had been up there again after me. I went back downstairs shaken, only to find my wife sitting on the couch watching TV, her expression calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't say a word, but the slight curve of her lips told me she knew exactly what I had been looking for. The next morning, though, something even stranger happened. I found a single photograph tucked into my briefcase at work. It wasn't one I remembered packing, and I swear it hadn't been there the night before. It was from that same black album. Me and my wife standing in front of the unfamiliar house, but this time someone had circled the house in thick red marker. At the bottom of the photo, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were the words, asterisk, go back before it's too late. Asterisk. My pulse raced as I shoved the photo into my desk drawer, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. Who had put it there? Was it meant as a warning or as bait to lead me straight into another trap? By this point, every thread I pulled only made the whole web feel bigger, stickier, impossible to escape. My wife wasn't the only one carrying secrets anymore. Someone else out there knew about me, about her, about us. Someone wanted me to dig deeper while someone else wanted me to stop, and I couldn't tell which path was safer, or which one would destroy me faster. And then, just when I thought things couldn't spiral any further, my sister called me late one night, her voice breaking through the phone in a way that made my skin crawl. She said she had heard a voice outside her window, a voice that sounded exactly like mine. Only it wasn't me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about my wife's voice changing. This was something much bigger, something reaching into the lives of the people closest to me, twisting reality, blurring identities, and planting evidence I couldn't trust. And with every passing day, the lines between what was real and what wasn't grew thinner, until the only thing I knew for certain was that the game wasn't just mine to play anymore. Because if my wife wasn't really my wife, then maybe I wasn't really me either. The phone call from my sister about the voice outside her window rattled me in a way nothing else had. Up until that point, I had been able to tell myself I was still in control, that whatever this was, it was confined to my wife, to the strange shifts in her behavior, to the bizarre photographs and missing evidence. But hearing the fear in my sister's voice, realizing she had experienced something that directly mirrored what I was going through, stripped me of that illusion. It meant this wasn't contained anymore. It was spreading, and whoever, or whatever, was behind it had no problem dragging the people I cared about into the middle of it. I stayed on the phone with her for hours that night, trying to calm her, reassuring her that she was safe, but deep down I knew I was lying. I couldn't promise her safety when I couldn't even promise my own. And the longer I sat in the dark with that phone pressed against my ear, the more I felt the walls of my life closing in on me. The very next day things escalated in a way I couldn't have prepared for. I left for work early, still shaken, and as I backed out of the driveway I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. It wasn't unusual for cars to be there. Our neighborhood was quiet but not deserted, but something about this one stood out. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, and even as I pulled out and drove away the SUV didn't move. I brushed it off at first, telling myself it belonged to a neighbor's guest or maybe someone waiting for a rideshare. But later that evening when I came home from work, it was there again, parked in the same spot, engine off, windows like mirrors reflecting the setting sun. I slowed my car and stared, waiting to see if anyone stepped out, but nothing happened. Just silence. When I pulled into my driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it, just barely, the faint glow of a phone screen lighting up behind the glass. Someone was in there watching. That night I barely slept, tossing and turning, haunted by the idea that I was being followed. My paranoia only deepened when the next morning I couldn't reach my sister. I called her cell again and again, sent texts that remained unread, left voicemails that went unanswered. It wasn't like her to go silent. She always returned calls, especially after the fear she had voiced the night before. By noon, panic was gnawing at me. I even considered driving to her apartment, but something held me back. The thought that maybe that was exactly what they wanted me to do. Whoever they were, they had already proved they could get close to her. What if me showing up just pulled me deeper into their trap? The helplessness ate at me, the thought that I was sitting by while someone I loved might be in danger because of my choices. Meanwhile, my wife was different. More than before. It wasn't just her voice anymore, it was her whole demeanor. She walked through the house as though she'd been living a second life I couldn't see, opening cabinets I didn't know we had, pulling old objects from drawers like she had placed them there herself long ago. She would hum songs I didn't recognize, but they stirred something uncomfortable in me, faint echoes that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Every time I tried to ask her about my sister, she brushed it off, smiling softly, almost tenderly as she whispered, "You worry too much. This isn't the first time she's gone missing." The way she said it, like she knew something I didn't, nearly broke me. How could she speak about my sister disappearing as if it were expected, like it had happened before and would happen again? I found myself staring at her longer than usual, studying her face, her movements, the little things that used to be so familiar. And I hated myself for admitting it, but the more I looked, the more I felt like I was staring at someone I didn't know. It wasn't just her voice, it was the way her eyes lingered on me too long, the way she seemed to know my thoughts before I spoke them, the way her smile held no warmth even when she tried to mask it. She wasn't my wife anymore, not really. She was someone else wearing her skin. The pressure built until I couldn't contain it anymore. One evening, desperate, I drove across town to clear my head. I parked outside a quiet diner and sat there for a long time, engine running, staring at the neon sign flickering in the window. That's when my phone buzzed. A text, unknown number. No words this time, just a picture. It was my sister's apartment door, taken at night, the number plate shining under the porch light. Beneath the photo was a short message. "You have 24 hours. Stop digging." My throat tightened as I stared at the screen, a sick weight settling in my stomach. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching me, they were close enough to stand at her front door, close enough to take that photo without her even knowing. My first instinct was to drive straight there, to pound on her door until she answered, to make sure she was alive. But then another thought wormed its way into my mind. What if that was the trap? What if going there meant walking right into their hands? I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my mind spinning out of control. Every scenario ended badly. If I did nothing, my sister might already be gone. If I rushed in, I could be next. And all the while, the voice of my wife, calm, patient, unsettling, played in my memory telling me asterisk, we've done this before. Asterisk, the repetition of that line, its insistence, made me wonder if she was right. What if this really had happened before? What if I was trapped in some cycle I couldn't break, forced to live it again and again while forgetting every time? By the time I drove home that night, the SUV was back, parked in the shadows near my house. But this time as I pulled into the driveway, the engine flickered to life and the headlights washed over me. The vehicle pulled away slowly, deliberately, as though to remind me it was there, as though to let me know they could close in whenever they wanted. I stood in the driveway watching it disappear down the street, a cold sweat dripping down my back. And when I finally walked inside, the house was silent except for my wife's voice humming softly in the kitchen. Only it wasn't her song this time. It was my sister's. A lullaby she used to sing when we were kids, one I hadn't heard in years, spilling out of my wife's unfamiliar voice as though it belonged to her all along. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just strange anymore. It was dangerous. And I was running out of time. Everything changed the moment I let my guard down and started believing I was piecing the puzzle together, because right then, the universe flipped the board on me and revealed something that made me doubt every single step I had taken so far. Up until now, I thought I was uncovering some strange, haunting phenomenon surrounding my wife. Her voice changing overnight, her cryptic words about us having done this before, the fragments of dreams that felt like memories, the strange shadows of people I couldn't identify, and the growing suspicion that I was being pushed into a game I didn't fully understand. But as much as I thought I was on the right track, there's nothing quite like the sting of betrayal that comes from someone you trusted suddenly showing their true hand, and that's exactly what happened. One night, while I was poring through notes trying to piece together the timeline of events, a close friend, someone who had been offering advice, someone who told me I wasn't crazy, slipped, and in that slip I realized he knew far more than he should have. The way he spoke about my wife's words, about her strange repetition of "we've done this before," it wasn't curiosity, it was familiarity. He said it like he had heard it before, maybe more times than even I had. That single moment ripped open a new layer of doubt and forced me to ask, was this entire mystery tied to her, or was I surrounded by people who were in on something I couldn't yet define? I confronted him, and I could see the fear behind his eyes, not shock, not confusion, but the look of a man who had been caught saying too much. He tried to cover it up, tried to laugh it off, but there was no mistaking it. My wife wasn't the only one who seemed trapped in this endless loop. My closest friend was part of it too. Or worse, maybe he was the one trying to keep me inside it. The betrayal stung deeply because this wasn't just any friend. This was someone who had been in my life long before I met her, someone who had been around for my milestones, my struggles, the moments that shaped who I was. To think that even he might be playing a role in this unexplainable cycle made me feel cornered, like there was nowhere left to run. And just when I thought I could push him for answers, he gave me a piece of information that upended the entire story. He told me I wasn't the first one to notice the changes in her, that years ago another man, someone whose name he refused to say, had gone through the exact same thing with her, down to the voice, the words, and the growing paranoia that bled into every part of his life. That revelation hit me like a freight train. If another man had gone through this before, what did that mean for me? Was I simply the next link in some repeating chain of events? Was my wife reliving the same story with different people, resetting the board over and over until the same tragic ending played out? Or was I somehow the same man, returning again and again, forgetting everything each time, doomed to rediscover the nightmare like some twisted reset button on life itself? The ground beneath my reality cracked open in that moment, because if his words were true, then nothing I believed about myself could be trusted. My memories, my marriage, even my identity could have been fabricated, reshaped, recycled through endless loops, each time pushing me closer to the brink. And the scariest part? He didn't seem angry or sad or desperate. He seemed resigned, like someone who had accepted the cycle long before me and had given up trying to break it. But that's where I'm different. I couldn't just sit back and let myself become another silent participant in this endless repetition. His resignation felt like a trap, maybe even a warning, but it lit something inside me, a defiance, a refusal to let myself be swallowed whole by the cycle. Still, his slip wasn't the only twist that turned everything upside down. The following night, as I lay awake next to my wife, listening to her breathe, I noticed something I had somehow missed before. It wasn't just that her voice had changed, deeper and heavier, carrying words she claimed were from another time. It was that every night, when she slept, she whispered names. At first, I thought I was imagining it, hearing fragments lost in the white noise of dreams, but this time I focused, I listened, and I heard them clearly. They weren't just random names, they were mine. Different variations of my name, versions I didn't recognize, names that sounded like echoes of me but not me at the same time. She was calling to men who could have been me in other lives, other cycles, men who maybe had gone through this before and never made it out. That realization shattered me because it proved one thing beyond a doubt. I wasn't just an observer in this story, I was the story. The cycle revolved around me as much as it did her, and the cryptic, "We've done this before," wasn't just a strange comment, it was the truth. Maybe we had done this before. Maybe hundreds of times. And maybe my own stubbornness to push forward, to uncover the truth, was the very reason it kept starting again. But just as I was piecing that together, my wife opened her eyes in the dark, stared right at me as though she had been awake the entire time, and whispered a phrase that twisted the knife even deeper. "You weren't supposed to notice yet." That moment changed everything. It wasn't just her voice anymore, or her strange words, or my friend's hidden knowledge. It was confirmation that she knew more than she let on, and worse, she was aware of exactly how much I was catching on. If she had been waiting for me to reach this point, what came next? Why wasn't I supposed to notice yet? And who was controlling the timeline of when I figured it out? The story I thought I was chasing had just unraveled into something infinitely bigger, something that made me realize I wasn't just uncovering a mystery, I was trapped in one. And now, as I replay her words in my mind, I'm left asking myself one chilling question. If this really has happened before, how many times have I failed to escape it? And how many more times will I be forced to try? It felt like every choice I had left was poisoned, every path pulling me deeper into a maze I couldn't escape. The more I searched for answers about my wife's sudden change, her altered voice, her cryptic words about us having done this before, the more I realized that I was being pulled into something larger than just a marriage mystery. Viewers, I want you to feel what I felt, because this isn't just about a husband trying to figure out what's wrong with his wife. This is about being trapped in a reality where truth feels like quicksand, where every move you make only drags you down deeper. You've been following me this far, and I promised you that every second you spend with me here is going to lead you closer to the answers you came for. But in order to understand where this is heading, you need to sit with me through this moment, this suffocating moment, when I realized I had to make a choice that could either save my life or destroy everything I thought I knew. I stood at the kitchen table, my wife across from me, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. She wasn't angry, she wasn't scared, she was calm, almost too calm, as if she knew something I didn't. And then she said something that rattled me more than anything she had whispered before. "If you keep asking questions, you won't like what you find. Choose carefully." That was the ultimatum, and it wasn't subtle. It felt like the entire house grew smaller, walls pressing inward, air heavier, as I looked at her and realized she was giving me a warning or maybe even a threat. But what hit me hardest was the realization that she wasn't speaking like my wife anymore. She was speaking like someone who had knowledge I couldn't begin to comprehend. I wanted to ask her what she meant, why she was saying this, but my throat tightened, and instead I found myself staring at her, wondering if the woman in front of me was even the same person I married. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about all the trending stories you see on YouTube, the true crime cases, the unsolved mysteries, the viral paranormal videos that make you question reality, and I wondered if my life was becoming one of them. I thought about how, if someone else were telling my story, they'd probably say, "He should have left the house that night. He should have walked away." But it's never that simple when your life is on the line. Walking away meant leaving my wife in whatever twisted reality she was caught up in. Staying meant risking that I was walking into something I wouldn't survive. And here's the truth. I couldn't bring myself to walk away because part of me still believed I could bring her back, that maybe the woman I loved was still in there somewhere, waiting for me to find her. Things only got worse the next morning when I discovered that one of the only clues I had, the old voicemail I had recorded when her voice first changed, was gone from my phone. Deleted, wiped clean. And I hadn't touched it. That piece of evidence, the one thing that could prove I wasn't losing my mind, had vanished. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours, scrolling through every folder, every backup, every cloud setting, and it was simply gone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. But all I could think was someone had erased it. And if someone had that kind of access, then I wasn't just dealing with my wife acting strangely, I was dealing with someone else pulling strings behind the scenes. That realization made my skin crawl because it meant I wasn't just fighting to understand her, I was fighting something bigger, something invisible. Later that day I confronted her, and for the first time I raised my voice. "Did you delete it?" I asked. Her expression didn't change. She just stared at me with that same eerie calmness and said, "Why do you hold on to things that aren't meant to stay?" That broke me. I slammed my hand on the table, shouting, demanding answers, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. If you push too hard, you'll choose wrong. I had no idea what that meant, but it stuck in my chest like a blade. That was the impossible choice, the one I knew was coming. Push for answers and risk everything, or hold back and live with the fear that I'd never know the truth. And viewers, that's the real nightmare of it all. It wasn't just the mystery or the loss of evidence, or even the shifting, unfamiliar woman my wife had become. It was being cornered into a choice where both paths felt like traps. The story wasn't letting me stand still, and neither can you, because if you've come this far with me, you already know that the next step will change everything. And just when I thought the tension couldn't get worse, just when I thought I had reached the peak of fear and confusion, something happened that made all my doubts collapse into one horrifying realization. Because that night, after the argument, I found a note under my pillow. A note written in handwriting I recognized, my own. And all it said was, "Don't choose her. Not again." It was in the middle of piecing together the fragments of fear and confusion that the realization hit me. The puzzle wasn't just about my wife or about her sudden, chilling voice change, or even about the cryptic words she had whispered to me that night. The more I uncovered, the more it became painfully clear that the strange circle we had fallen into was part of something much larger, a web that extended beyond our marriage, beyond our house, maybe even beyond our town. For weeks, I had thought I was unraveling a personal mystery about the woman I loved, but the deeper I went, the more I saw signs of others caught in the same pattern. A coworker who once casually joked that his wife sometimes woke up as a different person. A neighbor who confessed after one too many drinks that his brother swore he had lived through the same accident twice. These weren't coincidences. They were fragments of a hidden truth, and I was starting to realize I wasn't alone in this nightmare. But that realization came with its own terror, because if more people were tangled in this, then it meant there was an entire network keeping it hidden, and those involved were organized enough to silence anyone who got too close. I thought back to the missing recordings, the wiped files on my laptop, the way people avoided eye contact when I asked questions. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. And the scariest part was that someone close to me had to be feeding them information. Someone I trusted, someone who knew my schedule, my searches, my conversations with my wife. For days I found myself watching the people around me with new eyes, my coworkers, my best friend, even my brother, wondering which of them had been playing both sides, pretending to care while secretly steering me away from the truth. The breaking point came when I stumbled across a hidden message inside an old email my wife had sent to herself months before her voice changed. It was buried deep in the metadata, like it wasn't meant for human eyes, but the words I found there shook me to my core. "He will betray you. Don't trust the one who asks you to wait." At first, I thought it was another one of her cryptic ramblings, but the timing was too precise. It had been sent only days before everything started unraveling. The phrasing haunted me, "Don't trust the one who asks you to wait." Who had been asking me to wait all along? Who had been telling me to give things time, to stop digging deeper, to let the answers come on their own? And then it hit me like ice water down my spine. It wasn't a stranger. It was the very person I had confided in the most since this began. Suddenly, every conversation with him replayed in my head differently. The calming reassurances, the way he always told me to stop obsessing, the way he warned me not to press my wife too hard. I had seen it as concern, but what if it had been manipulation? What if he had been guiding me away from the truth on purpose? The betrayal carved into me like a knife, because it wasn't just anyone, it was my best friend, the person I had trusted more than anyone else outside my marriage. I wanted to confront him immediately, to demand answers, but fear kept me still. If he had been working against me all this time, then who was he really working for? From that moment, everything became sharper, faster, heavier. I no longer felt like I was chasing a mystery in the dark. I felt hunted. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. Cars that lingered too long behind me on the road, people who seemed to be listening in at coffee shops, neighbors who shut their blinds when I walked by. The conspiracy wasn't just close. It was wrapped around me, pressing in from every angle. And as much as I wanted to believe I still had control, deep down I knew I was standing on the edge of something massive, something that could swallow me whole if I took the wrong step. That was when I realized this wasn't about uncovering a secret anymore. It was about survival. Whatever had happened to my wife, whatever had changed her voice, whatever memories she claimed we had done before, it was part of a cycle, one that had claimed others and was now tightening its grip on me. I wasn't sure if I had days, hours, or even minutes left before they closed in completely. But I knew this much: the next move I made would decide everything. And just when I thought I had hit the peak of paranoia, when my heart was already pounding too fast to bear, something happened that made me question everything all over again, because the person I thought I could never doubt, the one I had defended against everyone else's suspicion, suddenly revealed a truth so shocking that it split the story in half and made me realize I had been blind from the very beginning. It all came crashing together one night when I decided I couldn't keep running in circles anymore. The signs, the betrayals, the whispers of déjà vu, I needed the truth no matter what it cost me. So I went straight to the one person I had once sworn I'd never doubt, the friend who had been there since childhood, the one who had convinced me I was imagining things, the one who told me to wait. That single word, repeated again and again like a mantra, was now a curse echoing in my ears as I walked into his house. The place felt different that night, too clean, too quiet, like a stage set just waiting for the curtain to rise. He welcomed me with the same calm smile, but I didn't see the friend I grew up with anymore. I saw the liar who had been pulling strings behind my back, the man who knew why my wife wasn't the same woman I married. And when I told him I knew he was part of it, he didn't even bother denying it. He just poured himself a drink, sat across from me, and asked if I was finally ready to understand. The words he spilled out next didn't sound real at first, but the more he spoke, the more the pieces locked together with sickening clarity. He told me that what was happening to my wife wasn't an accident, that she hadn't just changed on her own, that she had been part of something long before I ever met her, something designed to make sure no one like me ever uncovered the truth. He said she wasn't just my wife, she was a vessel, one of many, and the cycle I thought was some strange coincidence had been running for decades, maybe centuries. Each reset left fragments, memories, slips of the tongue, haunting whispers in the dark. And every time someone like me got too close to unraveling it, they were handled, silenced, replaced. That's when he leaned in and dropped the final piece, the one that twisted my stomach into a knot so tight I could barely breathe. I wasn't supposed to be here. He told me flat out that I was the mistake. That when this cycle restarted I was never meant to be part of it, but somehow I slipped through. He said that was why my wife whispered those names in her sleep, why she looked at me sometimes with recognition and sometimes with terror, because in her memory I was both her husband and a stranger. I wanted to call him insane, to scream that he was lying, but deep down I knew it explained everything I had seen, every chilling inconsistency that had haunted me. The tension broke when I demanded proof and he laughed, a hollow, bone-deep laugh that made the walls feel closer. Then he reached into his drawer and threw a file onto the table. Inside were photographs, documents, surveillance notes. My entire life was mapped out in front of me, not just from this year or the last, but going back decades, places I'd never been, moments I'd never lived. Except there I was in the pictures, standing in crowds, walking past landmarks, sometimes holding the hand of the woman who was now my wife, except she looked different, younger, but it was her. The blood drained from my face as I realized I had been part of this cycle before, and someone had made me forget. My whole life wasn't mine, it was recycled, rewritten, manipulated. I couldn't take it anymore. Rage surged through me and I lunged at him, years of trust and friendship shattering in a heartbeat. The struggle was messy, desperate, primal. Chairs crashed, glass shattered, and the air filled with the smell of spilled whiskey. But even as we fought, his words kept echoing in my head, "You were never supposed to be here." For a moment I thought I had the upper hand, pinning him to the floor, but then he whispered something into my ear that froze me in place. He said my wife wasn't the one I needed to be afraid of, that it was me. That I was the one who always broke the cycle, the one who ruined the program, and that's why they always reset me. That was the twist that ripped the ground out from under me. All this time I had seen myself as the victim, the husband desperate to save his wife, the man trying to claw through lies. But what if I was the danger? What if the reason my wife whispered strange names, the reason people kept watching me, the reason files existed with photos of me in places I didn't remember, was because I had lived this before, and every time I was the one who destroyed everything? The realization hit me harder than his fists ever could. In the end I didn't kill him. I couldn't. Because as much as I wanted answers, I knew he was right about one thing: this was bigger than him, bigger than me, bigger than both of us. He wasn't the mastermind, just another pawn who had accepted his role. The real enemy was something unseen, something that rewrote lives like pages in a book, and as I stumbled out of his house, bloodied and shaking, I realized the real climax hadn't even happened yet. Because if I was the flaw in their system, the one who always remembered, then they would be coming for me soon. And this time I wasn't sure if I'd survive the reset. I left that night with more questions than answers, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a storm I couldn't escape. The streets were empty, the city lights blurred through my tears as I tried to breathe, tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this cycle. I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles burned, and all I could think about was her. My wife, and whether the woman I had loved, the woman who had suddenly become a stranger, was still in there somewhere. I knew one thing for certain. Even if I had survived the confrontation with my so-called friend, even if I had glimpsed the scale of the conspiracy and the twisted loops of memory and time that had ensnared us, the danger wasn't gone. Whoever, or whatever, controlled this cycle wasn't finished with me. But in that darkness, I realized I had something they hadn't counted on: awareness. I remembered. I could see the patterns. And maybe that was my only weapon. In the following weeks, I kept my distance, watched carefully, and rebuilt the small routines of a life that felt half real and half imagined. My wife, she returned, or maybe she never left. There were moments when her voice sounded familiar again, soft and tender, but always underlined with a tension that made me flinch. It was as if she knew I had seen behind the curtain, as if she understood that the cycle had been broken, temporarily, but that it could snap back at any moment. I didn't try to force answers, I didn't press. I just listened, observed, and measured every word, every glance. And through it all, a strange sense of peace grew inside me, not because the mystery was solved but because I had survived it, and that survival meant something. For now I had control even if it was fragile. Yet the lingering sense of unease never truly went away. I kept seeing shadows and reflections, glimpses of faces in crowds that felt hauntingly familiar, and occasionally in the silence of the night, I would hear my own name whispered, not from her, not from anyone I could see, but from the air itself, like a memory trying to claw its way back. It reminded me that this story didn't end with a single confrontation or a single revelation. The cycle had been broken once, but the pattern existed beyond my understanding, stretching backward and forward in ways I couldn't fully grasp. And though I could no longer live blindly, I also knew that awareness came with a price. The knowledge that the line between safety and danger was thinner than I ever wanted to admit. I think about those nights constantly, about the voice that changed overnight, about the friend who revealed the scale of the conspiracy, about the notes left under my pillow and the whispers that felt like warnings. I've realized that the real mystery isn't just her or the conspiracies around us. It's the fragility of memory, the fragility of trust, and the idea that we can be trapped in patterns far larger than our own understanding. I still live my life day to day, holding on to the fragments of love, fear, and courage that got me this far, always aware that the next twist could come at any moment. And I share this with you because it's the truth of what I experienced, the truth that changed everything I thought I knew about reality, about love, about identity. And just when I begin to feel safe, just when I let myself believe that maybe the cycle won't reach me again, I catch a reflection in the mirror or a shadow at the edge of the hallway, and I hear it, faint but unmistakable. Asterisk, we've done this before. Asterisk, and in that instant, I understand that some stories never truly end. They linger, they repeat, they haunt you, and even when you survive, they leave a mark that won't ever fade. That is the legacy of what I lived through, the reminder that the unknown is always closer than it seems, and that sometimes surviving the mystery doesn't mean escaping it. It means learning how to live with it, watching, waiting, and remembering. The world feels quieter now, but I know the whispers are still out there, the cycles are still spinning, and maybe, just maybe, one day I'll see it all again. And when that day comes, I'll be ready, but I'll never forget the way it all began, the voice that changed overnight, and the chilling words that made me question everything. Asterisk, we've done this before. Asterisk.